do. And Holly and I want to tell you about Holly's and my trip to the United States a few years back. And we'd gone up to Boston because it's the second greatest city in the world. And we watched some sports games, which she loved. And yeah, she legitimately loved it. It's great. I have a winner of a wife. And then we traveled across the country by train. Don't ever go across the US by train. And we were finishing in Disneyland. Now, this was a very tactical move to finish in Disneyland because we would have spent most of our money. So there wasn't going to be enough to buy all the toys and everything that she would have wanted to. We went over with 2 suitcases. We came back with 5, so it kind of didn't work anyway. But we were going to Disneyland, and there was a lot of anticipation. What rides were going to be closed, let us down? What rides were I going to have to suffer through? How long could I avoid the absolute worst type of ride in the world? How long could I avoid the roller coaster? See, roller coasters are silly things, right? All they do, they're just there to make you feel sick. And sick is what they make me feel. And so day 1, avoided it. Well done, Shannon. Day 2, avoided it. Well done, Shannon. Day 3 was the day we went to California Adventure Park, which is next to Disneyland, and there's the great roller coaster that you've probably all seen, California Screamin'. It's in the name, Holly. Why do I have to go on this? And so we line up, and then the line moves forward, and then the line moves forward, and then there's no one in front of me in the line. Which is terrible, because not only does it mean that we're next, but we're in the very front of the roller coaster. What is going on? And it's just got a little warning. Warning, you will go 0 to 90 kilometers an hour. I think it was like 55 in 4 seconds, 55 miles per hour, because they're Americans. In 4 seconds, I'm like, great, this sounds wonderful. And so we get on, and it goes nice and slowly around the corner, just so everyone can get on. And it says, are you ready? Well, too bad. And then something else that I couldn't. Boom! We're off. Oh, my goodness. And we're going up and down and round. And then we hit the loop. And we get to the end about 2 minutes later. It was awesome. It was fantastic. But when something's that awesome, and when something's that fantastic, you don't want to ruin it by going again, do you? Just once. Just once is enough. Life's a little bit like that, sometimes. Life's a little bit like a roller coaster, the ups and downs, the twists and turns, the loops that we don't expect. Sometimes it's surprisingly fun, and sometimes it is really hard. We're in the last week of our Divine Encounter series today, and the story we're going to look at looks a lot like a roller coaster ride. We are going to look at the story of Elijah, which starts around 1 Kings chapter 16, right at the very tail end of 16, and goes through to the middle of chapter 19. And so we've got to set the scene, right, which is what chapter 16's doing. Israel's been ruled by kings for a while, and for a while these kings have been trash. Like, they're bad people, they're terrible kings. And we're up to Ahab, and Ahab is the one who is the king who did the most amount of evil in God's eyes. Imagine if that was your legacy, The king who did the most amount of evil in God's eyes had married the daughter of a rival nation, began worshipping her God, and then set up objects of worship for other gods as well. And so he's doing this while he's leading God's people. And Elijah gets to speak to this king. What a treat. And he comes to him and he tells him, hey, because of what is happening, because of what has been set up, you are not going to see rain for a while. It turned out to be about 3 years. You're not going to see rain. You're not going to see dew. Drought is coming. And then God tells Elijah that when this happens, to head into the wilderness, and he'll take care of Elijah. And sure enough, what God says will happen, happens. And so there is drought. There's no rain. There's no dew. There's nothing. And for 3 years, God looks after Elijah in the desert. He provides a stream for him. And when that stream runs out, he finds a family who will look after him. And then it's almost 3 years over, right? And God says, hey, it's time to go back. Can you imagine having to go back to the king who's done the worst amount of evil in God's eyes after you've just said a drought's coming? The drought's happened for 3 years, and hey, Elijah, just go back. During this time, Elijah's wife, the king's wife, Ahab's wife, has slain a whole lot of prophets. So Elijah's a little bit intimidated, and because he's the cause of this drought, he's a lot more intimidated. And so he goes back. And he speaks to this king, and this king and him have a little bit of back and forth about whose fault this is. Whose fault? No, this is your fault. No, this is your fault. You've done some bad stuff. You caused God. And they're angry, right? And Elijah says to him, you and your family, king, are troublemakers. For you have refused to obey the commands of the Lord and worship the images of Baal instead. You and your family are troublemakers. He says this to the king. That's some fairly bold words. And so he sets up this challenge because Elijah knows who the true God is. Elijah knows that his God has looked after him for 3 years. His God controls the weather. His God is the one that his people should be worshipping. And so he sets up this little contest. Summon all of Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, along with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, who are supported by Jezebel. So Ahab summoned all the people of Israel and the prophets to Mount Carmel. Then Elijah stood in front of them and said, how much longer will you waver, hobbling between your two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. See, the whole story of Israel now is back and forth with God, back and forth with God. They see God, they worship God, they follow God, they go, we're a little bit bored of this, and they turn off another way. And Elijah's here to say, this is enough. If God is God, follow him. This is the people that God have continuously reached out to rescue from trouble, to lead into his promises. And again, they're following someone else. They're dabbling with some other gods, following blindly their earthly leader down a trail of destruction. And Elijah is here to point back to the one true God. And so there's this contest set up, 850 prophets from this side, and Elijah and the God of Israel on this side. And so there's two beasts that are brought up this hill for sacrifice, and there's an altar built on the mountain. And the God who lights the altar first, the God who answers the prayers and lights the altar first, that's the true God, right? That's the true God. And so that's what this whole contest is. Now, Elijah, he's a gentleman. He's also supremely confident in who his God is because he's sustained him for the last 3 years. And he says, you know what? You guys go first. You and your 850 dancing prophets, you're up. And so the prophets of Baal and of Asherah, they set up the altar. They put the beast on top. They sacrifice it, and they start their dance. Which, thank goodness, I don't know how it goes, because I'd be tempted to do it. They start this dance, and they're calling out to their fraudulent God, answer us, light the fire. And nothing happens. But they keep asking, they keep dancing. And around lunchtime, Elijah is looking at his clock, he's a little bit bored, starts to talk a little bit of trash. I love Elijah. Starts to talk a little bit. Maybe your God can't hear you. Shout louder. Maybe he's relieving himself. Elijah knows how to talk trash. But they do. They listen to Elijah. They shout louder. They start cutting themselves to help their blood be part of the sacrifice. Surely that will work. And nothing happens. There's these 850 people calling out to this fraudulent God, and nothing happens. And so after their failure, it was Elijah's turn, and he rebuilt the altar. He dug a trench around the altar, and he filled this trench with water. Then, before he started praying, he got his people to fill 4 large barrels of water. And they walked it up the hill, and they poured the water all over the altar. 4 barrels of water plus wood. If this is going to light on fire, that's going to be a tough time, right? But he doesn't stop at 4, because he really wants there to be no doubt who got it. So he sends his people down again to bring up 4 more barrels of water, pours it over the altar. 8's enough, eh? No way. He sends his people down again. Imagine being one of Elijah's people having to walk up and down the stair, the mountain with these barrels of water. 12 barrels of water are poured over this altar. This wood is soaking. There's the trough, the moat around it. And then he prays. Elijah walks up to the altar and prays, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all this at your command. O Lord, answer me. Answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God and that you have brought them back to yourself." This isn't something that Elijah's not looking to glorify himself. He's putting the glory back to God. God, you are the one drawing your people back. Immediately, verse 38 starts, immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, "The Lord, He is God." Yes, the Lord is God. Elijah has had this 3-year encounter with God in the desert, where God provides for him and sustains him, giving him the confidence to go and speak to this murderous king and draw God's people back to true worship. He has faith. He has confidence, and this is born out of a constant relationship with God, out of an ongoing encounter with the loving Father. And that encounter, that reliance that Elijah had on God, caused those who had wavered in their belief to turn back to God and says, "Yes, you are the Lord." I wonder today, how is our reliance on God? I ask myself, how is my faith? How is my confidence? Am I looking for a continuous encounter of who He is, so that when faced up against the peril and the strength of a society that worships another way, can I rely on Him? How are you seeking that daily continuous encounter, that daily provision from God? Elijah is at the top of the mountain, and God shows His faithfulness. But we remember the story is a little bit like a roller coaster, right? And when the roller coaster goes up, the next thing that happens is the roller coaster goes down. And this one came down quick. When Ahab had got home, he told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. Sorry. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah: "May the gods strike me and even kill me if by the time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them." Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors who have already died." Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, "Get up and eat." Sorry. He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and said to him, "Get up and eat some more, for the journey ahead of you will be too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, where he came to a cave and he spent the night. Thank you, Chris. Elijah's just had this incredible encounter with God at the top of the mountain. He's seen who God is. He's seen that these other gods are frauds and have no power. And Jezebel says, "Well, may the gods come for me if you are not dead." And he's filled with fear, and he runs. Fear overcame him, even though he'd just had this incredible encounter with God. "Take my life, Lord. I've had enough. Let me die." He wanted the same outcome that Jezebel wanted for him. How quickly he forgets God. How quickly he forgets God. How quickly, when there are obstacles around us, when obstacles come right in front of our face, we can forget God. We can see the obstacle in front of us rather than the God who is around us. When everything seems bleak, it can be so easy to choose to give up, to walk away, to say, I'm done. But God wasn't done with Elijah. He sends this angel and provides for him and provides for the road ahead. Just as he provided before the mountaintop experience in those 3 years, he provides again sustenance for the continued journey. He reminds Elijah who he is by doing what he's always done, but he communicates it in a different way. This time he communicates through an angel. We all have those times at the bottom of the roller coaster, when things happen we don't understand, when life is too hard, when we are scared, when we are unsure. In those times, it can be hard to hear God. It can be hard to see God. It can be hard to even know what he looks like. And it's easy to say that when you're a little bit up from rock bottom, but it does not easy to feel when you're there. I wonder if for some of us today, if we need to look round, would we see that angel reminding us who God is? And I wonder for others of us today, perhaps God is asking you to be that angel, to remind the family, to remind your friends, to remind the community who God is by being the provision for what is needed to help out our fellow humans come up from the bottom of the roller coaster. Sometimes God asks us into the situation to help lift each other up. Sometimes we need to remember that God puts us in the situation for those who can't see him or don't know him. But he puts us there so that he will be known, to help be a divine encounter for someone else. Maybe that's what he's asking of you today. We go back to Elijah, and he's spending this night on the mountain, and one more time, God encounters him. The Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah replied, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Go out and stand before me on the mountain," the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that rocks were torn loose. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" A third encounter with God, a third way that God speaks. We have this first encounter, this display of fire and power and majesty for his people. We have the second encounter with an angel to remind and inspire Elijah to keep going. And then we have this third, much more personal, small voice. Not a big display of might or majesty, just the voice. And instead, a voice that names him, a voice that knows him, that sees him, and asks, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Does God ask us that today? Because he's the same God who knows us and sees us. And he asks, "What are you doing?" How are you looking for an encounter with God for yourself? How are you being a person that enables others to encounter God? How are you letting the God of creation whisper in your ear, tell you who you are, tell you who he is for you and what he has for you to be and do? God speaks to us in different ways, and God can encounter us and use us to encounter others on all parts of the life, the roller coaster of life that we ride together. Are you looking for him? Are you listening for him? How would you answer if he said, "What are you doing here?" Let's pray. God, thank you that you love us, that you provide community for us to be loved into. and to show your love to those who aren't part of the community yet. God, thank you that you are with us in the ups and downs of life. Help us to recognize you. Help us to know, to reach out for you. Help us to be people that others can reach out to point towards you. Thank you that you love us. Thank you that you choose to encounter us every day. Help us to be part of that encounter. Help us to play our part. Help us to know that you are God and we are not. Amen.